Hi, I'm Eric, and I'm back with another video. It's Monday evening, and of course, the big topic these days is Iran and what's going to happen with this terrible war that Iran is unprovoked, unleashed on the poor um, visitors to the Persian Gulf in the form of U.S. military bases. They're just tourists there. And it's outrageous that Iran has decided to attack these innocent tourists. Well, of course, I'm joking. Obviously, the United States has had the knife out for for Iran for a very long time. And but as I've mentioned before, it's all connected, and we'll be getting into all of that. So first of all, I just want to mention that I've a friend who I met him in Thailand, but I've known him for years, and he's moved to Brazil for some reason. And so I asked him how he's doing, and he showed me pictures of his nice apartment, and then he says he chats. This is on the chat. He says, "So how are you in World War III?" So more and more people are talking like this, and I've joined and I've pointed the many armed conflicts that are going on or threatened to break out. But as if they weren't enough, President Trump and his quote unquote sidekick, quote unquote poodle, quote unquote master. You never really know who's in charge there. Is it Trump getting Netanyahu the orders, or the other way around? Probably the other way. I think it's some of this. It's like, you know what a lichen is? It's a symbiotic relationship between a fungus and an algae. So maybe that's the relationship that Trump and Netanyahu have. So anyway, so they decided. So they together, I just heard what is it? Netanyahu said, "We've unleashed the lion's roar with our good friends, the Americans, on Iran." So he again, the thing is, they had negotiations going on, and they were really close, really close. They just had some technical details to work out, and then it turns out that was all a fraud, and they had the date picked out for when they were going to do this. The ships came into position, and bingo, it happens. So but what is the reason for this? Why are they doing this? I mean, it's on the one hand, Trump said they're complaining about Iran's suppression of the peaceful demonstrators, in Iran, that were killing people and shooting police officers and shooting indiscriminately and so on. And these are all, and Mossad is by their side, according to Mike Pompeo. But again, this is all just peaceful protests. And so how dare they, Iran protect itself from these foreign spies trying to screw up their country. Anyway, but then there's the other issue. They want demanding Ukraine. We'll get to Ukraine in a minute. They're complaining about Iran's nuclear enrichment program, which they got rid of. They say, we've got to blow them up because of their nuclear enrichment program, but you already blew it up. So what's the problem? Well, you never know. Then there's the issue about making nuclear weapons. And Trump says, we're going to make sure that Iran never makes a nuclear weapons. And Iran is saying, we don't want to make nuclear weapons. We've got a religious fatwa not to make nuclear weapons. And Trump says, we don't care what you say. We know that you're making nuclear weapons. You've been 3 weeks away from making a nuclear weapon for the last 30 years. So this is their thinking. And then what's the other issue? Oh, yeah, they want to bring democracy back. So they're going to bring democracy back by bringing back the son of the Shah. And so what's that all about? Well, in 1953, Iran had a democracy, and the president was President Mossadegh, and he had the idea, the audacious and hubristic idea that maybe the oil profits from Iran's oil should go to the Iranian people, but that wasn't good enough for the Americans and the British, so they set up a coup. They created riots and all kinds of disorder in Iran, and eventually Mossadegh was deposed, and they put in the Shah, who instituted the Savak, which was this brutal secret police that was killing people and making life miserable for Iranians. And that was 1950. It was 1953. So it took them 1953, 63, 73. So it took them 26 years to 1975 by the time that Iranian civil society organized itself enough to get rid of these people. And at that point, there was a lot of give and take between different factions within Iran, which I'll talk about later. But of course, it ended up with the Islamic Republic. Anyway, so the British talked about democracies. After World War I, the reason why there's all this turmoil in all these Arab countries is because the British said to the Arabs, if you will help us defeat the Ottoman Empire, you'll get democracy. And as soon as the war was over, the British installed monarchs. So the British lie through their teeth, and the Arab countries have been under constant difficulty ever since. Granted, there were Arab secular nationalists and even socialist-oriented governments, but all of those are completely unacceptable to the West. And of course, Iran, not being an Arab country, but it's this West Asia, or we could call it the Middle East, that the United States absolutely has to have its grip on. So this is the issue of it. But the thing is, they tell you a lot of stories about why they want it, but they can't get their story straight. But one of the key problem here is something called perpetual war for perpetual peace. And of course, the peace they're talking about is, we have our boot on your neck and you're going to like it. That's the idea of peace. But in any case, there's a book that was written actually several books by the name of Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace. Probably the most well-known is Gore Vidal's Perpetual War for Perpetual Peace. I've got it listed in the description. And then there's another book that was written called Addicted to War. In another book, The People's History of the American Empire. So I'll just kind of run through these briefly. The last one, of course, is Killing Hope by William Blum, which is that's the litany of American regime changes and invasions and things like that. And you can actually find this book. You don't have to buy it. You can go directly to the CIA website. They're proud of themselves for causing all this mayhem and havoc. But anyway, getting back to the background of this, following World War II, there were several empires that fell. The British lost India, South Africa, Kenya, and so on, and its other colonies, but it wasn't quite ready to let go. So it created what it humorously called the British Commonwealth of Nations. In other words, your wealth belongs to us and you'll like it. Likewise, the French lost Algeria, Vietnam, and the African Sahel nations. However, it still tried to maintain control over the Sahel through the use of French-created currency. And when Gaddafi of Libya, that was actually an Italian colony, and got its freedom from Italy, and then eventually Gaddafi staged a coup against the monarch in Libya, and he was the leader there for a number of decades, and it had the highest standard of living of any country in Africa. But his problem was that he wanted to create a gold-backed currency for all of Africa to free itself from this dollar domination, and in the case of the French former colonies, this French controlled currency. So the West contrived to depose him and could, for good measure, they shoved a knife up his backside just to let everybody know that who's boss. And of course, we call this Western civilization. Now, into the vacuum went the USA in various attempts to recolonize surreptitiously, as described in detail in William Blum's book. Iran was, like after Korea, at the top of this list with its staged coup against Iran's democratically elected leader Mossadegh, as I just mentioned. But what has happened is that in 1979, as I mentioned, Iran got rid of the Shah, and Iran has been in a mode of just say no, which is the title of this presentation. So Iran has different factions ranging from far right to some far left. And well, I'm citing an article here which is from the far left. It makes some interesting points. This is from an organization called Red Pepper. It's a far left organization, but it does say something which I had known of because at my age I had actually followed the Iranian Revolution. So it says, despite the hijacking of Iran's secular 1979 revolution by religious nationalists with the help of the major Western powers, who by supporting Khomeini and the Islamists, sought to build an anti-communist barrier vis-a-vis the neighboring Soviet Union, no matter what its human cost for the people of Iran. Iranian society never acquiesced to this medievalism and barbarity. And that is one of the factors at play here as we deal with this whole situation. As I say, I remember at the time that secular democratic forces were playing a significant role. I remember there was a guy named Bani Sadr and Rafsanjani. There were other people, there were other factors, and it wasn't just the mullahs who were calling the shots. But eventually, of course, the mullahs did gain control of the Iranian political process. However, as I'll explain, they're not the only game in town. There are other forces at play in Iran, which the United States weaponizes, by the way, in order to bring Iran down. So I recently saw an interesting and telling statement by the late leader Khamenei, and he was referring to how women should be treated. He said that women should be treated as a flower to be tended to carefully. And in my opinion, of course, spouses should treat each other respectfully and lovingly. The implication is that the wife is a possession, not a partner, which may rankle some modern secular Iranians. So popular pressure is apparently having an effect. So many Iranian women don't cover their heads, despite the religious authorities' previous demand that women do so, and young people show affection in public, which must horrify their elders. As Bob Dylan famously said, the times they are a-changin'. So here's another article that I'm quoting from. It says, be that as it may, it seems to me that the overall tendency in Iran is that of sovereignty. Iran cannot allow itself to become a puppet of Israel or the United States. It seems that Iranians of all factions understand the first priority. So sovereignty is the only way forward for Iran. And Iran has been struggling since at least the 1953 coup to maintain its sovereignty. The US, UK simply refuses Iran to work out its own problems. As the article above notes, the same problems of inequality, this article that I mentioned, the same problems of inequality, corruption, and repression that exists in many countries, including the West. And that is the core issue that Iran faces. And only an ejection of foreign interference will give Iran the chance that it needs. But of course, that is not in the playbook for the West. They do not want to let Iran just be Iran. So likewise, Israeli plans for regional hegemony pose a serious threat, not just to Iran, but to every country in West Asia. We just saw a news item where Saudi Arabia has declared war on Iran, even though there are maps of the greater Israel, which shows Israel taking over a fairly large portion of Saudi Arabia. Who's the threat here? The Saudis have military bases on Iran's soil. They signed a peace treaty, a treaty with Iran earlier with the help of the Chinese, and yet they've been collaborating closely with the Americans. They've been playing footsie with the Israelis, and they talk about Palestinian rights, but they don't really act on it. So Syria, not Syria, but Saudi Arabia has gotten attacks on their oil fields. So this is all getting really pretty crazy. Now, the question is that Iran understands this thoroughly enough to go all in, but the Western imperialists and their unsinkable aircraft carrier Israel and the Gulf monarchies' stranglehold on their own societies, vassalage to the U.S., have been holding back West Asia since the end of World War II. That is what is actually going on here. And that is the question. Now, I wanted to interject here that, Pete Hegseth, who's the Minister of War, I think that's what he calls himself. Certainly not the head of the Defense Department, but the War Department. And he's got tattoos in his body that are signifying the Crusades. So it's as if the United States is in a crusade against Iran and has been for decades, if not since the year 1000 with the original Crusades, when the Europeans first invaded West Asia, or what we call the Middle East. But in any case, the question is, can the Iranians manage to free themselves from these Western threats? Now, that's one question, but there's a second question which affects you and me. And I did some research from the Cost of War Project. This is something that Brown University puts out. And here are some recent findings. I'll read them to you. It says, in the 2 years since the October 7th, 2023 Hamas attack on Israel, the U.S. government has spent $21.7 billion on military aid to Israel. The U.S. has spent an additional roughly $10 billion on military operations in Yemen and the wider region since October 7th, 2023, for a total of about roughly $30 billion is we're talking about in U.S. spending on the post-10/7 wars, that is, since October 2023. Now, as of October 3rd, 2025, the official record is 67,000 people in Gaza have been killed and 169,000 injured, according to the Gaza Ministry of Health, although there are so many people buried under the rubble that it's impossible to really count it. Another number is that it says that 234, this is again off the Cost of War Project, that the roughly 236,000 total casualty injured and killed constitute more than 10% of the pre-war population in Gaza. It's probably closer to 500,000. And at least 5.27 million have fled or been forced to leave their homes as of September 2025 in the post-October 7th, 2023 wars in Gaza, Iran, Lebanon, the West Bank, Syria. I think they've even attacked Yemen. They've attacked Israel has attacked many countries. And of course, all of this is paid for by the United States. So it says also that there's, of the people who've been forced to leave, about almost 2 million children under the age of 18 are been forced to be refugees. In terms of military spending, it produces an average of military spending that the United States, has, it averages 5 jobs per $1 million. The same investment in other sectors creates more employment. Nearly 13 jobs, or more than twice as many in education, 9 in healthcare. And America's healthcare system could be better, could probably use more workers. And 7 to 8 jobs in infrastructure and clean energy. From 2020 to 2024, private firms received $2.4 trillion in contracts from the Pentagon, approximately 54% of the department's discretionary spending of $4.4 trillion. This is from 2020 to 24. Another cost of war is the expanding tools of political influence used by the arms industry, including extensive lobbying, millions in campaign contributions, the revolving door between former officers, and now they become lobbyists, or they become board members, highly paid board members of these military corporations. And they're also on think tanks, and they're on government advisory committees, and they're on television or the internet telling you what the real story is, even though they're lying through their teeth much of the time, or they're just flat out stupid and wrong. So the U.S.-backed Israeli military operations since October 2023 will lead to a far higher indirect death than direct death rates. Now, over the course of the war in Afghanistan, 24% of U.S. women servicemen and 1.9% of men experienced sexual assault. The military-industrial complex is enmeshed with Silicon Valley. A growing portion of Pentagon spending goes to large tech firms for surveillance purposes, because they don't trust you and me to make decisions about how our country should be run. War contributes significantly to climate change. The U.S. Defense Department is one of the world's top greenhouse gas emitters. I've heard it is the top emitter. And official U.S. discourses about security threats from China and Russia are characterized by threat inflation, meaning that every time they want an increase in the military budget, they say, oh, China, or oh, Russia, or oh, Iran, for that matter. They scare us in order to give them more money. It's an extortion racket, basically. So Americans are inundated with cultural products that promote militarism. Many of them are influenced by the Pentagon, from movies to sporting events. I once went to it was a reading. It wasn't a poetry. It was a reading of a book by Wendell Berry, who talks about rural life and the importance of organic farming and things like that. But before the presentation, there was a military honor guard band production, which has absolutely nothing to do with organic farming or family farms or anything of that nature. It's just money just blown on bullshit. So the entertainment that we consume normalizes war. There was one movie that I saw a few years ago called Tenet, T-E-N-E-T, and it's about the threat of a Russian gangster who is very upset about, I think it's his girlfriend jilted him or something, and so he decides to blow up the entire time-space continuum, not just the United States, not just the West, not just the world, but the entire time-space continuum. And who stops him? But the CIA comes in and saves the day. Tenet happens to be it's a kind of a word puzzle type of thing, where T-E-N-E-T, spelled forward, spelled backwards, spelled diagonally, it's all T-E-N-E-T. It also happens to be the name of the former head of the CIA, George Tenet. So it was a big infomercial for the CIA, and people paid good money to watch this crap. Ridiculous. So anyway, now after 9/11, The wars have been accompanied by erosions in civil liberties and human rights at home and abroad. The U.S. government is conducting counterterror activities in 78 countries. This is all on the Cost of War project. It's 3.6 to 3.8 million people have died indirectly in post 9/11 war zones, bringing the total death toll to at least 4.5 to 4.7 million people since 2001 and counting. It's probably significantly more than that, actually. At least 940,000 people have died due to direct war violence, including civilians, armed forces on all sides, contractors, journalists, and humanitarian workers. U.S. policymakers scarcely considered alternatives to war. In the aftermath of 9/11 or in debating the invasion of Iraq, many of those alternatives are still available, but they are not chosen because they don't pay, the Pentagon's bloodlust. The cost of war in Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Syria, and elsewhere totals about $8 trillion. These do not include future interest costs on borrowing for the wars. 38 million people have been displaced by the post 9/11 wars in Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Yemen, Somalia, and the Philippines. The cost of caring for the post 9/11 war vets will reach between $2.2 and $2.5 trillion by 2050, most of which has not yet been paid. But all of this is coming out of, other budgetary priorities that are not being funded. And of course, war veterans, U.S. war veterans, are suffering from mental health crisis. At least 4 times as many active duty personnel and war veterans of post 9/11 conflicts have died of suicide rather than in combat. So the ripple effects on the U.S. economy have also been significant, including job loss and interest rate increases. And we're about to see dramatic increases probably in oil prices because of this destabilization of the whole energy situation in the Middle East because of this war on Iran. So in conclusion, I would say it's a step in the right direction for the various political factions in Iran to unite over the issue of national existence and sovereignty. And I just heard a clip of someone saying, who was an opponent of the regime, saying to a Western, commentator, "You guys, we have our hands full trying to deal with these religious people. We don't want that kind of government, but you're making our job much more difficult. If you just leave us alone, we could work things out, but you won't do that. So we have to unite with a regime that we really don't like, because our top priority is to keep you out." So now the implication of this, I see this as the fact that the U.S. is spending so much money and so much energy on this Iran war, which clearly was avoidable, means that the project in Ukraine is going to be even less favored. So it could be that not only are we going to lose in Iran because we don't have enough missiles and missile defense capabilities to defeat Iran, but we actually are weakening Ukraine, and that will make it easier for Russia to win that war. So the point here is that the West is on the verge of getting kicked out of Eurasia, and that is probably what will happen eventually. So we'll just have to see how this all works out. But what I would say is that if the U.S. does get kicked out of Asia, that'll be the best thing that ever happened to the American people, because all this money that has been going towards the military, these endless wars, that money can come back home and take care of the American people finally. And the warmongers and the liars who got us into the wars, at some point, hopefully, these people will see some justice. And the people who, did the blackmailing through the Jeffrey Epstein files and so on, we need a major restructuring of U.S. society in order to get us out of these wars and these lying narratives that we've been subjected to for literally decades. So that's what I want to talk about here. And the bottom line is that what we American people need to do is we have to face the literally murderous addiction to war and just say no. So thanks again for listening to my commentary here. And if you would, please give it a like, give it a share, talk about this with your friends. Say, make the connection between these endless wars and the fact that we have a poor healthcare delivery system. People go deep into debt when we should have free healthcare the way most advanced economies have. And not just as a nice thing to do for the American people. If you don't have a healthy society, you can't compete. So it's in our interest. Healthcare should be the top priority of our defense as a country. So we need to talk about these things with people. So again, thank you very much for listening. And if you want to make a contribution or at least like or share, that would be very helpful in furthering the information I'm trying to give you. So thanks again for listening, and I will see you next time.